Welcome aboard. We all hope that you're like a butterfly emerging from the cocoon, emerging from the darkness and spreading out your wings, turning your world into color. And we can certainly help you do that. We ask people to take challenges in their life. We encourage people to not walk through their life, but explode through it, to run from passion, not to be pushed. And if you feel that you're welcome nowhere else, be assured that you're welcome here. As our friend Mr. Rogers said, we like you just the way you are. Welcome to tonight's podcast. My name is Jim Ellermeyer. I'm a behavioral health therapist, and today I'm joined by my good friend, producer, and co-host of this program, Mr. Mike.
Hey, how's it going, Jim?
Well, Mr. Mike, I was been thinking a little bit about the old novel 1984 by George Orwell and all of that. Do you remember what that book was like?
I remember it mostly from its interpretation in the Apple commercial.
Okay.
The dystopian future where the Big Brother was watching over you.
Yes, and the words entered our vocabulary like newspeak and groupthink and some of the things that came out of that, such as hive mind. Okay. So what is groupthink to you, Mike?
To me, that's where everybody's kind of going along with a broad idea, right? Mob mentality sometimes pops in my mind a little bit, but probably on a little broader sense.
On a little broader sense, yes. And normally when we enter into that type of mindset, we would do things that normally we would not do if we had to make the decision based only on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea here is that when we have this group type of thing, there's some type of homogeneous group, there's some type of a leader, and there is discouragement of critical ideas or alternate ways of thinking. Okay. And generally, we don't want to upset the group. We don't want others to perceive that we don't think like them. So these groups generally are homogeneous. They're usually of the same type of ethnic background or some type of common trait that holds them all together. All right. So, however, one of the key characteristics of this group is that they tend to disparage people who are unlike them. Have you ever run into anything like that, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, kind of. I do come from a small town, and that seemed to happen a little more often than not out there.
Right. So what we do is we overestimate the power of the group, and what it does, it leads to some irrational thinking and perhaps some risk taking. All right. So let's take you and I for example.
Hmm.
Okay. We agree on many things, many things. However, there are some fundamental differences that you and I like to discuss. However, they're usually based on our perspectives. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
Oh, I know we have a lot of discussions about social media and the dangers of it and whether you should even bother with it. Again, and of course, I mean, this is, and we talked about it, like it's our perspectives on it too.
Perspective. Say more about perspective, Mike.
So you deal with people that are on the bad side of things, right? Whatever they're involved in, whether it be drugs and alcohol or whether it be society or social media, they can't cope with it. It's become a problem. It exacerbates a problem that maybe they're already dealing with. Whereas on my side, we're dealing with communities. We're dealing with connecting people. I just went to a wedding for a guy that I met when he was 16 years old online as part of my podcast, and now he's a grown man and I'm traveling halfway across the country to go be in his wedding.
And that's a wonderful benefit.
Hmm.
And again, when we talk on this program about detangling, deconnecting, unplugging to plug in, what we're talking about is removing the things from our life that are not healthful for us or don't help us grow.
Right.
Like we often talk about the soil that we plant ourselves in. So if you have a bitter poison cucumber and you take one bite, would you take another?
No,
No, not necessarily, right? However, how many times do we go to that same well of social media where we engage in conversations, disputes, or conflicts with people who we have little or no chance of convincing to see it our way?
absolutely. And it is so interesting because people are like, I can't go on Facebook or Twitter anymore. It's so negative. And I was like, what part of Twitter are you on? What part? Like, it is a little bit of what you make it, right? You're the one that follows these people. You have a direct action, and you also have a direct response in a lot of these cases to mute this person, unfollow this person, to kind of shy away from the trigger problems, right?
And hence we get into that groupthink type of situation where my way is correct. A group of people that I associate with think this way, therefore you must be wrong, and therefore I must convince you of the error of your ways.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, while positive and connecting and all this, and you can kind of shy away from those things that do make you upset when you look at the internet, you can also go very deep into the group think thanks to these same tools. That's what a lot of discussions about what has exacerbated some of the things happening in politics in the world today are because the people that have a certain way of thinking dive into a certain corner of the internet and get to connect. They don't feel alone with their maybe alternative thoughts, right? Whether it be not liking somebody of a certain ethnic background or anything like that. Now they can surround themselves digitally, grow that group think.
So they buffer themselves by surrounding themselves
Absolutely.
with absolutely and completely like minded people where there is no reality tester,
Exactly.
there is no devil's advocates.
I believe when we talk about Steve Jobs and Apple, it was the reality distortion field a little bit.
Say more about that.
Oh, well, that was an idea that if you were around him and when, uh, you were trying to, you know, can I get this product done? How important is it for me to get this project done on time? When you're around Steve Jobs, he just made, the reality of the situation was whatever he helped you perceive it to be almost.
So what happens is you actually serve as your own self-censor
Hmm.
as because you're afraid to express your doubts
Hmm.
or fears for the fact that you would be excluded from the group.
Exactly.
So that
Uh,
takes a lot of courage to speak up one's mind, does it not?
hmm
Okay, so how does that work in your life, Mike?
In me, I have a podcast, so I can say whatever I want and know that I have to deal with the consequences. As do you with your microphone, and you deal with the consequences.
We all have, as I have.
Hmm.
So we all have platforms, and we espouse our various uh, type of philosophies in life to get to go forward. However, we always have to look at what is the intention. Okay, is the intention to promote my own ego, or is the promotion to attempt to show people what works in our life, and perhaps given the opportunity for them to have a choice, they can incorporate it in their own.
Absolutely.
So, how many times have you been on social media where people have just been bludgeoned and attacked?
Yeah, that's a problem. There's actually an issue that came up with that around somebody writing for some of our neighbors up the street, and it's unfortunate because it seems that the bully pulpit is so large these days, right? And on both sides, if somebody does something that's drastically opposed by one side, there's a gang up mentality, right or wrong, and vicious. They think they're right because they have so many people behind them doing the same vicious actions.
So, there's an old saying that might makes right.
Hmm.
Is that correct? Okay. It's my country, right or wrong.
Right.
Okay. What type of thinking is that?
It's a very geocentric thinking, is the one word I can think of.
So what happens is that the group becomes more important than individual freedom of expression.
Hmm.
And simply because somebody expresses their opinion doesn't necessarily mean that they're right or wrong. But it seems help me understand the reason that some of these topics on the social media sites can become so inflammatory.
You're hiding behind your keyboard, right? These are not things that you would say face to face to a person. I think we've talked about this topic on this
Mhm.
cast before. There's a bit of, whether it be anonymity, because especially on Twitter you can just be any handle, there's no verification that you're this person, versus Facebook. It gets just as bad as on Facebook too, when you are connected to an identity, and there are ways to fake it as well on there, but there is that kind of removal from the situation. And when you are, I have dealt with people that have said very vicious things to me online, and I have seen them in person, and or even said something to me or emailed me something, and I will respond and say, "Hey, let's talk about this. What's the problem here?" And they're say, "Oh, it's like they didn't realize there was a real person on the other side." Because I think there's not even a detachment of I'm protected by the keyboard. Also, that person I'm talking to the other side that is just text or a profile picture isn't a real person, right?
I think you've come on to a very strong point there, where this it becomes dehumanizing. When you hide behind anonymity, you don't see another person hurting.
Hmm.
You don't see another person crying. You don't have no idea what their life circumstances are and how vicious and cruel you can. And often when you do that, you're egged on or encouraged and supported by your group mind, your followers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then they rush to the rescue. I've had people do this for me. Where somebody would come at me on something, and then I would just have a lot of people just backing me up, right?
Yes, and maybe that makes you feel good for the moment, but
Hmm.
really and truly in the grand scheme of the universe, is that important?
I don't know, but either way, but it happens both ways and on both sides, right? Whether it be the negative people or the positive people.
So sometimes on these social media site, is it the message that you put out, or is it the number of likes and the number of followers that you get?
That's the thing, because I try to very consciously be a positive force, because I know I do have a platform. I know I do have a certain number of followers that may or may not be listening to me. So I want that to be a positive vibe. I want to only speak a certain way on certain platforms like this, or maybe we do have a little more a broader barrier on certain platforms. But no, and you never know. You may like and that nice little buzz in your spine when you're like, oh, 20 people liked my picture on Instagram, but there's so many people that maybe didn't like it, that still it affected, right? That's a measurement, but that doesn't mean the person that didn't like it isn't the one that's going to come up to you later on as like, wow, that actually helped me in a moment.
So this keep in mind that everything rolls in cycles throughout history, throughout life, throughout human emotions, thoughts, and feelings. So, however, often when there is an in group or a leader, and quite often the leader or the in group does not promote a particular action, but by failing to comment on situations that occur that are normally against generally accepted morality, then that type of action, by lack of recognition or commenting on it, becomes almost acceptable.
Right, right. There's not enough people in certain cases saying this is wrong,
Hmm.
right, or loudly enough.
Right. So, what did Dr. Martin Luther King say? Evil will triumph when good people say nothing. Okay. So the idea is the courage. Does it take courage to sit there and say hooray for us, or does it take courage to sit back and say, let's take a look at this again.
Hmm.
So let me give you an example when in the 12 step world, in an AA meeting, when there is a meeting, let's say a business meeting, once a quarter that where they learn how to spend money, do different types of things. When they come to a consensus, before they have a final vote, they ask for the minority opinion. They ask for a couple people to come up and say if they have a thought on another way to go.
Hmm.
And quite often I've seen that when the minority opinion comes up, then the vote was changed. But however, the idea is that to allow people to be heard. Allow people to be heard. It's so easy to stand beside your buddy and say, yeah, I agree with you,
Hmm.
even if you don't.
And that's a lot of the political discussion these days is that's how things have gotten to a certain point, because there was a section of people that didn't feel like they were being heard. Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of fishing without bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.